Who doesn't like a good old accordion? Those little things that can be collapsed and opened. And one might think that this is not really a big deal. I mean, how much wrong can you do there? This is the most basic fundamental thing that's literally everywhere. As we will see later, this is the pattern which is probably the underdog of all the interface elements out there, because it's actually literally everywhere. So let's get that right first. So this is the accordion. I mean, not a big revelation, is it? You click somewhere and then the thing expands or it collapses. And of course you can add a bouncy animation and transitions and stuff like that. And this is an example coming from Stripe doing it really well, right? But also you'll find out that this pattern, the accordion, is used literally everywhere. And this is the Belvedere Museum, Vienna. And this is probably the website with the most accordions in the world. There are many of them, including in places where they might not necessarily be extremely useful, but everything is collapsing and expanding. And this is a very common way of doing those things. And specifically, if we look in here, accordion is used very often in order to collapse or present information in a bit more compact way. So we try to group things and close those cards, as we call them sometimes, just to give you an actual overview, a good overview of all the options they have without overwhelming them with all the details of each individual option. And of course, later, as you scroll further and explore the site, you'll find out that even things like this, where all the tickets and all the different options for tickets are accordionized as well, right? So accordions can be everywhere, but also in very different places. And they can look different as well. So this is a trip planner from Norway, from Oslo. And here they're also using a beautiful, nice accordion, as you can see here, right? Where things are kind of zigzaggy, collapsed, pretty much like what you see right here, right, with the accordion thing. And it's really interesting because while we tend to think that it's just a plus button or it's a particular, like a chevron pointing down, you can actually be creative about things collapsing and expanding as well. But it's more usual to see things like this happening in all kind of interfaces, where you see a larger scope or a larger view on the larger screen. Then on the smaller screen, you actually see things kind of broken down into groups or collapsing to show the details. And then when you click on details, you actually get the full information right there. But the state can differ and can change depending on whether you're on a small screen or on a large screen. Another way of using accordions would be for something like table of contents, where you don't want to display it on a small screen because it's just going to take up a lot of vertical space. So instead what you do is, well, you show it actually on desktop where there is a lot of space to show it, but then on mobile, what you end up is collapsing it, kind of indicating that something can be expanded with a plus next to it. And in fact, if you look into it, well, this pattern, once clicked, will expand to something like this on mobile, but only on demand, only when you actually need it, right? That's a nice little touch that can actually make up the information you present, displayed in a bit more compact way on mobile. And also for other things, like for example, commonly asked questions or FAQs, where again you will have a couple of questions lined out, and then whenever somebody clicks on one of those options, that thing will expand and you can actually read that information, and you can also scroll down and see the other things as well. And so in action, this would probably look like this, right? Again, nothing big, nothing groundbreaking. And you might be a little bit bored at this point because, yeah, so we know all of that. So what's in it then? Well, the thing is, it depends, because sometimes you might be really careful, you might need to be very careful when it comes to the selection of an icon. So what icon would you choose if somebody asked you to design an accordion, right? What if you have to, design something like a pricing plan, right? And you want things to collapse and open on mobile? Would you use a chevron pointing to the right? Or chevron pointing down? Or maybe a plus? Or the special one, the plus with the circle? Or maybe anything else? There are options. Well, what would you choose? The problem is there is no real consistency when it comes to choice. Here we have a nice example where you can open, but you can't really close that segment of that accordion. Things just stay as they are. That's a bit unusual, but it happens sometimes. And sometimes you click on an icon and then it expands, but then you have to move your finger or move your mouse cursor to actually close it, right? Beyond that, you will also find that sometimes when you click on one of the sections, nothing happens because the tab bar is not clickable, although it actually should be. So when you click on the icon, then actually something happens. But then you also have examples like this, where instead, when you click on the section, yes, it does actually what it's supposed to do. So there's a lot of inconsistency in the way we're designing it. So if we take a look at The Guardian, for example, well, we'll find out they have a couple of sections, and specifically they have news, opinions, sport, culture, and lifestyle. And these sections, of course, will have some subsections, maybe 7 or 8 each. So here's the challenge for you. Take a few minutes, notice the red cat bumping in the bottom right corner. And just think about what icon would you choose to indicate expansion. I mean, there are also options, like there is a chevron pointing down, the plus, and all these options, right? And also specifically, where would you put that icon? Would you put it on the left, like next to news, opinion, sport, and culture and lifestyle? Or maybe in line right after each of these individual items? Or maybe all the way to the right, but it's a little bit empty at this point. So where would you put it? So take a moment, think about it, and let's continue in a second. So, well, the truth is, I kind of cheated a little bit, because before you can start designing, you have to really make some tough decisions and smart choices. And so we actually do have a checklist for pretty much everything we're working on. Just to have a conversation with designers and developers if it's something a little bit complicated. Just to know, okay, this is what we do, this is how we do things. To avoid all kind of inconsistencies or all kind of weird problems in communication later on. Now, when you think about it, how would you design a category's title? I mean, it doesn't seem like a big deal, does it? Well, the problem is, what if you have two people coming to the same website with a different set of expectations? Well, we saw earlier some websites are a little bit different, and some accordions are a little bit different as well. So if you do look for something like soccer, well, you probably will want to go to sport. But at the same time, you might want to go to the sports section to just get an overview of what's happening in sport at this point. So how should Accordion accommodate for that? I mean, something has to happen when you click on sport. Should it drive the user straight to the category? Should it actually act as an expander? But what if it acts as an expander, but the user actually wants to go to the sports homepage, right? At the same point, if it actually goes to the homepage, well, maybe with an icon that would actually indicate expansion, well, some people will misstep or misclick anyway. So how can we accommodate for both of these situations? We'll have to figure it out in a second. What icon do we choose? How do we indicate collapsing and expanding state? Do we place the icon on the left, right, and inline, and so on? This is the one that really designers struggle with in design rooms. When one of the sections is open, should the other be collapsed or not? Questions over questions. You never know where to start and where to finish. And what happens if a user clicks on the category link or on an empty bar? Should expanded state section ever collapse automatically at all? There are many, many questions, and you can actually dive into this checklist a bit later, but let's see what actually the Guardian decided to do. So in that case, they put the icon on the left, they use a chevron, like probably many of you did as well, and as you click on it to expand it, what they ended up doing is adding the sport home section, right in the first item under sport. So they added the sport home section or title right under the first main sport item. So if you're looking for soccer, you can still get there. And if you're looking for sports section, well, now you can actually go there without having to click on another icon somewhere. And it kind of solves two problems with the same solution, which is really, really nice. But you might wonder, okay, so that's kind of helpful, but what about the icon? Does it even matter? Well, if you look into some studies, they will tell you that it actually does not matter. Well, in our experience, it actually does matter. So this is a study that was done a while back, where they started looking into all the different ways of how you can design an accordion to indicate expansion, and people were tasked to actually find a particular item in the navigation, and then they measured time that people needed to get there. And so, there are different options, obviously. And what was really interesting about this is not necessarily the fact that everybody was able to find what they're looking for, of course, but people tend to click on different areas depending on the icon and where it's placed. And also, people tend to spend a different amount of time trying to find what they actually need or what they're looking for. So that's an important consideration to notice, because according to that study by Widget, with icon placed on the right, users tend to click on the icon and not on the text, which might be a bit surprising. And with all options that icons was placed on the right, the result was a slower task completion. Now you might wonder, does it mean that we should not put the icon on the right? Well, it does not mean that, but what it actually means is if you put the icon on the right, people are more likely to click on it, right? So, remember what we talked about in the previous segment? We need to make that icon big because this is going to be the main focus where people will want to hit. And the reason for that will be mostly because people have been burned in the past. They don't want to click on the section because they might be actually going to the section, although they actually want the accordion to appear, so they don't want that. They might not click on the empty bar, especially on mobile where you don't really have a hover area, right? You just tap and hope for the best. So not mostly, but sometimes you end up that empty bar doing really nothing. Although of course probably the entire tab bar should act as expansion. So for many of them the only hope that they have is that the icon will actually do what it's supposed to do. And so they click on the icon and they end up where they probably want to go, kind of expanding the entire accordion. But then of course the choice of the icon is important. So if you look at this set of pricing plans, what you'll find out here is that wonderful plus with the red circle on, kind of sitting on the red circle. So what happens if you click on it? For many of us, almost like a mysterious expectation would be that something would expand, probably vertically, right? In fact, nothing happens here, and there is a good reason for it, because this is a way of how a bundle is presented. And I'm sure that if you're a designer, I know I've done this mistake tons of times. If you're a designer and you're asked to actually sell a bundle which contains two products, Push and Live 9 Intro, for that particular price, well, you might think that plus is a good way of indicating that it's a bundle. And in fact, if you look into the heat maps when we're running tests on it, you'll find out that people really do click on that plus like crazy. And so you really have to be careful. And the same goes for everything. In fact, I would say that plus is probably the most dangerous icon you can use. And also plus have different meanings too. One of them is zooming in and zooming out, right? Some people might think that this is also some sort of a light box. Or what about this one? What do you expect to happen when you see that button, the red button at the bottom, with a chevron pointing down? Well, some people would expect a drop down to appear, and other people would expect a scrolling to down to the page. In fact, it is scrolling to the middle of the page. The problem is, some people actually think that this is a drop down, scrolling down just to expect it to somehow extend, right? So it would be better to go ahead and replace that icon, the chevron, with an arrow pointing down. And overall, when it comes to accordions, we need to keep the accordion checklist in mind and use chevron or plus to indicate expansion. We couldn't find any discrepancies or differences of how people understand them. In fact, it doesn't matter what you place them, even if it's like a weird symbol that people don't understand. If other items don't have it, they will expect something to happen when they click on it. Now, icons should map well with the direction of expansion. Very often, as we saw in the Slack example before, you have an icon pointing to the right, which can be problematic. Well, from your side, it would be like this. It would be problematic, mostly because the expansion will probably take place vertically. So make sure that the icon maps well with the direction of expansion. The chevron would change direction from top to down and the other way around. The plus would change to close or minus, maybe with a little animation, that would help. Place the icon on the left or on the right, but make that icon big. The entire bar should act as expansion. The category's main page could be listed in a drop-down. An expanded state could collapse automatically, but maybe it shouldn't. Well, it really depends on what you think the proper design is. When it comes to something that contains many items and sub-navigations and things like that, it might be a good idea to collapse to give the user some sense of orientation so they don't get lost as they scroll down. But if it's a quite short navigation, I would probably say go ahead and leave users be. Just give them the choice to close when they want and open when they want and how they want it. So as you can see, even something as seemingly obvious as an accordion is not necessarily obvious at all. In fact, there are many little things that we need to note or consider or just make decisions upon before we even start designing one. So it doesn't matter what interface problem you have, what components you need to build or design. Think about accordions. They might work very well. And in fact, especially in areas where you don't expect them to work at all. In the end, they're all about breaking down complexity and creating little groups and segments that you can collapse and open if needed. And that's something that not many other components have. So accordions are a big underdog, so use them carefully.